Yeah, so welcome once again back to community. Let's see if I can get this right. Com Community pluralism and difference in Halakhic practice. Knew all the words, I didn't know the order for them. So welcome again to Community Pluralism and Difference in Halakhic Practice with Rabbi Dr. Alex Ozar. Thank you everyone for joining us once again. I'm not going to introduce the class and Rabbi Ozar again, but just once again, I'm going to be inviting people to be panelists so that will allow you to raise your hand and unmute if you have a question, or you can put them in the chat or in the Facebook comments if you're watching us on Facebook, and I can relay any chat comments or questions or Facebook comments to Rabbi Ozar. And if you do accept our invitation to be a panelist, you don't have to do anything. You're welcome to turn on your cameras if you desire. And again, raise your hands. But we do ask that you stay muted when you're not speaking. So once again, I'm going to promote people to panelists, which you can accept or reject with no pressure. And again, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Rabbi Ozar, and look forward to today's class.
Okay, thank you so much, Chaya. Thank you to, as always, to Drisha for making all of this happen. And thank you to everyone for being here and learning together. So what's the giant me again? All right, I'm gonna fix that. So as per our custom last time, I'm gonna try to speak relatively briskly. It's very hard to pay attention on Zoom, but please feel free to interrupt, ask questions, interject any way you can. Get my attention, get Chaya's attention, put things in the chat, just start shouting. There's the hand wave function, whatever it takes. Okay, but we're just going to dive in. So last week, among other things, it was making the case that approaching the problem of pluralism and difference in community, and it's not so easy. Approaching this problem is necessarily, we're going to have to see it as a multivariable and a complex one. We can't just ask, do we want to be inclusive or do we want to be exclusive? It's going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on what's at stake in the particulars of the case. And more specifically, we're going to need to know things like, who is it that we're considering including or excluding? What kinds of relationships do we have with these people? What kinds of relationships do we want to have with these people? What kinds of differences and disagreements, what kinds of values are in play? What is the conflict about? And we're going to need to know the particular setting. So we will all have much higher standards for agreement and conformity and values with respect to who we're going to marry. So you really want a high degree of overlap in central critical values with the person you're going to make a life with. You'll have much lower demand for conformity of values of people who you live in a neighborhood with, people you go to the grocery store with, and somewhere in between will be people who you'll be willing to be in a shul with. You're going to want a fair amount of conformity, but also won't require complete conformity. So last week we looked at a case addressed by Rav Moshe Feinstein, where the people in play, the relationships in play, it was family, a father, an elderly father relating to their children and vice versa. The values in play were very, very serious and very grave. It was a matter of, especially from the father's perspective, the children might have thought it was all old Narishkeit, but from the father's perspective, this was spiritual life and death. Can I eat kosher food, or will I be forced to eat treif meat? And behind that, just the narrow question of who is going to eat what, there was the just massive generational gulf between the elderly, religious, pious father who took for granted that Jews are meant to observe a very specific set of laws in a very rigorous way, and his children, from whose perspective this was all old, just Narishkeit, it was just complete silliness. They were good, young, atheist communists who believed that their father's ways were ridiculous. And the question was, could they eat together? And on the one hand, this is very high stakes in terms of the setting. In general, people will have a fairly high demands for the kinds of people they're willing to have at their dinner table. We do want people we can get along with, and we're going to require a lot more conformity of values at the dinner table than we will at the grocery store or at the bank. And it just mattered a lot, as Ramosha Feinstein made clear, it just mattered a lot practically because the father needed to eat. So it was very high stakes. And on the other hand, precisely because of those high stakes and because the nature of those high stakes, where it was a father relating to his daughters, we also had the opportunity to address the serious problem in a much more powerful way. And so Ramosha Feinstein introduced this idea that rather than whereas our adherence to halakha might make us think that we're forced to relate to others in terms of an abstract system of classifications. People are either in box A or box B. You're either an observer of kashrut or you're not an observer of kashrut. And the question as to whether or not we can trust you, as to whether a piece of meat is kosher or not, depends on whether you're in class A or class B. So it's an abstract technical legal question or statutory question. And Ramosha Feinstein was saying that's actually an inadequate view of halakha, traditional Jewish law. The halakha is capable of incorporating on its own terms a personal dynamic fluid relation where the person says, I trust this person, I trust my daughter, not because she belongs to class A, the category of person of kashrut observers, but because I know her and I love her and I trust her and I know that she would never deceive me. And I know that she would never deceive me, both because she's an honest person and because she knows how much this matters to me and she would never want to hurt me. And so precisely when we're in the frame of the family dinner table, and so precisely where the stakes are so high for getting it right, we also have the opportunity for a much more powerful response to navigate that challenge. So today I want to look at it. This is semi-systematic. I'm going to be introducing. We've got 8 weeks. I'm going to be throwing out a series of case studies that are going to build a kind of mosaic. So this isn't a fully neat logical progression, but I'm going to try for some thematic coherence. So here we're going to hold constant the dinner table setting. So that's still our frame. We want to know how to go about helping people get along or not get along. We're going to figure out how navigating the problem of pluralism and difference around the table, and think through also a little more deeply, or just a little more why that's of such a charged site and why it matters so much that we get that right. So we're going to hold that constant. Here, the players are not going to be a family per se. We're going to introduce a new character this week. And I promised Lindsay we'd get to the character of the heretic or the deviant, which we saw a little bit last week. So we'll do that more directly in future sessions. And tonight, if it's really fascinating in-between liminal character and rabbinic thinking of the Am Haaretz. In contemporary rabbinic parlance, so the Am Haaretz refers to just an ignoramus. So in yeshiva circles, you have people who are they're lomdim or lamdanim, people who learn well. And you can be a baki, you can be an expert in Torah. You can be a Talmud Chacham if you reach the pinnacle of accomplishment in Torah study. And people who don't know anything, people who haven't spent years in yeshiva and who haven't learned extensively, they're called an Am Haaretz. There's a similar term in contemporary speech, just the Baal Habas, just the house owner is not necessarily learned. That can have a much more positive valence to it. The Am Haaretz still in contemporary jargon, it has it's a muted valence, but still a negative valence. You're saying something bad about the person, disparaging, that they're simply ignorant. They're not informed about the basics of Jewish law. Going back to the ancient rabbinic frame in the period that we call Chazal. So we're talking the end of the Bayit Sheni period, the end of the period, the BC, and then say the first 500-600 years of the Common Era, the classical period in which the Mishnah and Talmud are written. So here it's important to understand, and we're going to see this dynamic coming up, recurring throughout history. I was making the case a bit for this a bit last time. You'll have periods of significant fluidity and dynamism in terms of Jewish identity. If you would have asked a nowadays, those of us who are traditional Orthodox Jews construct our understanding of Jewish history and identity such that the way we practice Judaism now, the way we understand Judaism now, sort of followed of necessity in an unbroken chain from Moshe to the Zakanim to the Nevi'im and on, and then you have an unbroken chain of transmission until the current day. And that's true. I believe that's true. But if you would have taken you would have had a just dispassionate anthropological observer and dropped them into the late Bayit Sheni period, around the time of Jesus. And you would have asked them, please point to the authentic Jews, the people who are doing Torah Judaism the way it's supposed to be done. And they would say, I have no idea. How could I possibly tell? They're the rabbinic Jews, the people that Jesus calls the Pharisees. They're the rabbinic Jews hanging around Jerusalem. They're also the Sadducees. There are the Essenes. There are these people out in the Dead Sea, or in the desert, near the Dead Sea, doing all this other crazy stuff. And then there are these Christians who are also kind of Jews who say, I just have no idea who the real ones were. And one of those strands winds up prevailing for interesting reasons. You might think it's providential, but the point is, at that point, if you were a Jew, and now that was the frame of the anthropologist, if you were just a Jew living at the time and you weren't didn't already have an allegiance to one of those groups, I wouldn't be at all clear which one. Let's say you woke up one day and you had an experience and you felt like, gosh, I want to be about tshuva. I want to return to my roots and embrace the Torah again. You wouldn't necessarily know which group to join or what to do. So our Chazal, our rabbis, the predecessors of our form of Judaism, have a lot of anxiety about their own form of Jewish identity and understanding and practice. And so they're extremely eager to police their boundaries. They want to make very clear what they stand for. And then if you want to be a part of their group, then you need to do things exactly right. And so a lot of things that later on in history we might be willing to be very relaxed about. And we don't need to make a big deal if a person does this or that. At the time, it meant a lot because it was very important to say you're either in the group, and if you're not, which means you need to do all of the things we're going to demand to be in the group. And if you don't do all the things we're demanding, all the markers of group identity, then we're going to push you out and say you don't belong. Because what we can't have is anyone playing both sides. You can't be a Sadducee one day and a Rabbinite the next day. And you can't be a little bit of both. Because if you're a little bit of both, that says to our community that it's fine to just be a little bit of both and to be unserious about it. And we need you to be committed. So they're going to draw very clear, bright lines. The Am Haaretz is a person who is, on the one hand, just a kind of negation. They're not a Talmid Chacham. They're not a rabbi, and they're not what the rabbis call a chaver. So this term is still used in contemporary discourse. I earned my smicha rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University. Their practice is to refer to the people who receive the corpus of human beings who've received rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University as chaverim. So in contemporary Hebrew, it just means friend. But so I would greet a colleague and greet him as my chaver. In Mishnaic Hebrew, it means not just a friend, but somebody who belongs to a club or an elite society. And every elite society will have very strong, clear markers of who belongs to that society or not. So I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna first look at this is my email, which is not interesting. We're just going to look at a totally stunning, kind of terrifying text. This is not the sort of thing you would ever hear quoted in a rabbinic drasha or a homily from the pulpit, because it's a horrifying text, an extremely difficult to read text. But it's giving expression. It's here. It's in the book in Masechet Pesachim, and it's giving expression to what is apparently an incredibly powerful social force in response to an incredibly powerful social problem. So here's Pesachim Memtet. V'lo yisa bat amei aretz. The whole long discussion before this about there's recommendations about who you should try to marry ideally, you marry the daughter. It's just to men. Ideally, you marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. If you can't marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham, so you marry the daughter of the Parnes at Sibor, the person who's in charge of the shul president. You can't be that. Someone else who's of some importance and stature in the community. But then at the end, it says, Lo yisa bat amaretz. Never, ever, under any circumstances, should you marry the daughter of an amaretz, an ignoramus. Mimnei shehein sheketz, because they're vermin. And the women are vermin. Would be to marry one of these women would be like sleeping with an animal. They said like really horrifying language. But something really powerful is going on here. Tanya Rebbe Omri Amar Asur Basar. He says that an ignoramus, someone who's not a part of the rabbinic elite, they are not allowed to eat meat. They don't enjoy
Rabbi
that
Ozar.
privilege. Yes, please.
Rabbi Ozar, sorry. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm still seeing your email. Is it possible that you paused your screen? If you clicked pause share, then your screen, like we wouldn't see what you're doing on your screen. We'll see whatever it was looking like when you originally paused it.
How about now?
I'm still seeing your email. Maybe should I try sharing this worksheet? I can do that. I'm still seeing your email.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing, just your email.
Wait, here. Okay, here. Let me try this one more time.
All right, thank you.
Sorry
in the meantime,
that.
I'm going to just repeat that I'm going to promote give everyone an opportunity to be promoted to be a panelist. It does not give you any pressure. It just gives you the ability to turn on your camera if you want and to raise your hand to ask questions if you want. No pressure, but I'm going to give everyone that opportunity again now once we're talking. Okay, now I'm seeing Safaria.
Great. Okay,
wonderful.
Thank you for stopping me.
No
if I got any interesting emails in the meantime, if anyone wants to let me know, I'll check them. Okay, I think it was pretty boring. Okay, and then I'm going to read through this very quickly. So we don't need every single word. I want you to get a feel for the genre and just the kinds of feeling and emotion that are being expressed here. Says the people who don't study Torah day and night, they're not like the rabbinic elite. They don't deserve to eat meat. It's a mark of privilege. They don't deserve because they don't excel rabbinically. Amar Rabbi Lezer, Ama Aretz. This is totally wild. He says, when it comes to an ignoramus, mutar lenocha ro b'yom kippurim shechal liyot b'Shabbat. He's using a traditional halachic rabbinic frame to emphasize his point. So you obviously you cannot slaughter an animal on Shabbat. You certainly can't slaughter an animal on Yom Kippur, and you certainly can't slaughter an animal on Yom Kippur that falls on Shabbat. But he says you can slaughter, brutally murder an Amaretz on a Yom Kippur that falls on Shabbos. So wicked and vile and repulsive is the Amaretz. Amr lo Tamidav, Rebbe, Amor l'shokta. Why do you say stab rather than slaughter? Amr l'hen zeh ta'un bracha, because when you slaughter something, you slaughter an animal, it's the kind of thing you make a bracha on because it's proper kosher meat. V'zeh eino ta'un bracha, but slaughtering an Amaretz, it doesn't even deserve a blessing. He says you can't. It's forbidden to accompany them out on their way. They go on the street because al chayav lo chaz. And you would do this if somebody was going to go on a journey, so you'd walk them out to the edge of the city to make sure that they were properly accompanied and guarded. And not alone. Says al chayav lo chas. He says because the Amaretz doesn't care about his own life. Al chayecha ve'ro lo kol shekain. You think he worries about his friend's life? What does it mean that he doesn't care about his own life? Because he doesn't study Torah night and day. If he doesn't study Torah night and day, it means he doesn't genuinely care about his own life. In which case, you can't trust him to be out on the road because he might kill you, and you don't owe it to him to protect him. You can tear open an Amaretz like a fish. And really like a migabo you do it from behind without any dignity. Rabbi Kiva, when he says, when I was an Amaretz, Rabbi Kiva only becomes part of the rabbinic elite when he's 40. He says, when I was a bir ignoramus, I said, talmid chacham, if only I could come across a rabbi, so that I could bite him like a donkey. Rabbi Kiva is saying the antipathy that the rabbis are expressing towards the Amaretz is mutual. He says, when I was an Amaretz, I felt the same way towards the rabbis. And Amar Talmid of Rabbi Amor Kikelev, why do you say you want to bite him like a donkey? Why not like a dog? Because this one, the donkey bites and breaks a bone, and the dog bites and doesn't break a bone, and I want to actually break his bones. I'm going to stop this here. I don't need to go through the entire text. You see in this, obviously, nobody was actually recommending violence. Nobody ever took this seriously as a call to go around stabbing ignoramuses. But there is a deliberate form of like literary cartoonish exaggeration to express a deeply violent antipathy between the rabbinic elite and the Amorites. These are two groups that see each other as mortal enemies. So that's just important background. There's some interesting historical research we could get into about why this appears in the Talmud Bavli and doesn't seem to quite appear elsewhere for another time. Okay. So briefly, what is an Amaretz? What does it take to qualify as an Amaretz? I've been using the translation just ignoramus, somebody who's just not particularly learned. But the Rabbis actually have a fairly developed, as they often do on many topics, a fairly developed discourse, set of debates around the precise parameters of what constitutes the identity of Amharitz. Although it is notable the extent of rabbinic debate about this. There are so many, the proliferation of suggestions as to what the identity is, how we should properly categorize these people. And then, as we're going to see, is and the main star of the show tonight is to see the way that Chazal wind up again articulating a very strong boundary that says we cannot be together with these people. We need to keep ourselves separate. We can't allow community with them. But then the way that they start pulling that back, or start moving back towards the Amorites, and the rhythm I was trying to articulate last week, where the rhythm of communal togetherness and relation moves, where people sometimes need to pull apart, they need to differentiate and say, we are different. I am not like you, and you are not like me. But then it is also a part of being a human being and a part of being a Jew that we will again draw towards each other when that becomes.
Is Rabbi Ozar
a few
frozen?
times in
Rabbi Ozar?
a few different Mishnah.
Rabbi Ozar, you were just
Yeah, was
frozen
I
for a
frozen
moment there. Yeah, can you just repeat the last minute of what you were saying? Or
Oh gosh. Yeah.
less than a minute. Really, it was less than a minute. I think the last thing I heard was you were saying that it's part of both being a person and a Jew, also to draw closer to other people. Yeah.
Right. Great. So I don't think we missed much of anything. So we're gonna. And I think I was saying that the star of the show tonight is going to be once again the way the halakha throughout history will go in these cycles of first drawing clear boundaries, saying that it's necessary for us to draw clear boundaries, pull away. But then as the community becomes more comfortable and there's a feeling of safety and self-confidence, the community will then be able to draw closer together and sustain a greater measure of difference and nonconformity within the community. And I think, especially as we saw last week, sometimes just the natural feelings and the longing for people that we love, but who we felt that we had to push away. But those natural feelings of longing and togetherness in community will then come to dominate. And then again, there'll be the same cycle in the other direction. Okay, so the Mishnah in Demai gives a sort of definition of who qualifies as the Amaretz, and here the contrast class, the category of person who's not an Amaretz is a Ne'eman. Masechet Demai deals with produce that so produce grown in Eretz Israel are required to take various tithes from it. The Truma goes to the Kohen, the Maser goes to the Levi, and there are a few other things that need to be done. And all that needs to be done, the portions of the crop need to be separated before you can consume it. And so if you're buying fruit in the open market, so either you buy it from somebody you trust, a fellow chaver or ne'eman, a trustworthy person who you know can corroborate would have gone through the proper procedure, or you can buy it from a random person. If you're buying it from a random person, you just don't know, is the produce properly tithed or not. So this is the what's called dine. It's produce of uncertain provenance. And so there's a lot of really fascinating material and that from which we can learn a lot about rabbinic relations with the community around them, because that's what this is fundamentally about. We are a part of a broader community. We sometimes need to buy fruit from them. How do we go about doing that? So the hamakabel level yot ne'eman in source number 2. So somebody who agrees and accepts upon themselves to be trustworthy. So this shows us, all right, by the way, at the time, it wasn't just that people who practiced a certain way were de facto a member of the rabbinic elite. There was an initiation ceremony and a commitment ceremony. You got up and you said, I hereby accept the following set of standards. And the fellows in the club would say, well, we grant that, we hear that you've accepted it, and we've gone through your application, and you wrote a great essay, and we're very impressed with you, and we hereby accept you into the club. But if that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter how observant you are. But okay, so so somebody who accepts upon themselves to be a member of the trusted class. So they're obligated to tithe everything that they eat. Every Jew is obligated to tithe all the produce that they eat. And they're obligated to tithe everything that they sell. In theory, this isn't necessary, because in theory, you could sell produce to someone else and just tell them that you haven't taken the tithes, and they could take the tithes. But part of the rabbinic stricture here, if you want to be a part of the club, is that you need to take it upon yourself that you won't introduce anything to the market that isn't ready to be consumed, because and this is a matter of benevolence, or kind of religious ritual benevolence to the common folk, because you don't know who's going to buy it, and you don't want somebody to buy something that's not kosher. Also, anything that you buy on the market, you need to take tithes from. You can't just assume that the other person took tithes. The eino mitareach etzel am haaretz. The Mishnah says you may not lodge and eat, stay at a bed and breakfast, or stay over at your friend's house with an am haaretz, because you can't eat with them. You can't be a part of their lives in that way. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he says, no, it's not true. And the implication is, what it's saying directly, if you do in fact eat at the table of an am haaretz, then you cannot be a chaver, you cannot be a ne'eman. If you want to be a part of our group, a part of the rabbinic elite club, you need to agree and promise us that you'll never dine with the am haaretz. We need a clean break. You need to commit to that in advance. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he says that's not true. He says no. It is fine. We all have friends. We have family who are not members of the rabbinic elite, who are just regular people out on the street who haven't gone through your little initiation ceremony. And he says it's not reasonable. You can't tell us that in order to be a member, to be a chaver, a ne'eman, we need to agree not to eat with our close friends and family. Simply unreasonable. And he says, and look, there are ways to make sure that you don't eat anything non-kosher. And there are ways to establish relative trust. Maybe it would be great if we could avoid eating there, but you can't say that you don't belong if you do. Okay, and they go, the rabbis respond. They say, he says, this person who says, look, I'm going to eat with my family of Amei Aretz, well, he's clearly not careful. He's not punctilious about his own observance, because he's taking a risk when he's eating at his family's house that they're going to serve him untithed produce. And he's not going to be able to get out of eating. It's going to be too socially awkward. And so he says he's not careful. So how can we trust you? How can we trust this guy if you're willing to eat with your family? So that's the rabbinic response. There's a further set of qualifications. There's an addition to this in the Tosefta. So there's the Mishnah is like the classic early compendium, or the major canonical compendium of rabbinic teachings. The Tosefta is a sort of apocrypha isn't the right word, but a kind of just extra literature surrounding it that records a lot of contemporaneous teachings. And so here we get an addition. Amar lo, they say to him, here it's Rabbi Meir who takes the view that one who dines with an Amaretz can't be a member of the rabbinic elite. Here, mimehem shel bali batim lo nimnu miliot ochlin zeh etzel zeh. They said this has never, ever happened. They're not here. The formulation is amazing. Saying it's not arguing it as a matter of justice or right and wrong, or as a matter of directly of halakha. Saying, look, you are trying to introduce a standard that no one has ever observed and that no one will ever observe because it's not practical. This look, since there is in no point in time when there have been people who are Jews trying to live their lives, have people refrained from eating at each other's homes. And again, this means from eating in their families' homes, from eating in their siblings, their parents, their close friends. It's giving expressions people know deep down, just as a matter of just who they are, the fabric of their being, that being able to dine with others is vital to relationships and community, and relationships or community are vital to who we are as human beings and Jews. And there is no way you can put up this sharp a boundary that says that you cannot enjoy meals with your friends and family. There has to be some way we can bridge that gap and make it work, even though there's this real difference here between the Chaver and the Amaretz. So already, just at the earliest stage, this is the earliest stage of recorded rabbinic teaching, we have this back and forth. And there's this impulse to say we need to draw a clear line. And the impulse is precisely to go for the jugular and say, we need to cut people off from the Amaretz at the dinner table. We cannot allow people to dine with the Amaretz, is if we do, then our entire project falls apart and our community's identity and definition will fade, be subverted. And the response is, first, just no, that's not necessary. And then it's just not practicable. People have relationships and you cannot simply tell them that they are never under any circumstances allowed to dine with their friends and family. Okay. In Masechet Brachot, this is source number 4. So the Mishnah says, some complicated background we're not going to go into. The Mishnah says that there's a category of person called the Kuti. Is another one of the other classic others in rabbinic thinking. The Kuti are usually translated as the Sumerians. I think the Sefaria has Samaritan. My understanding from something I learned in college is that the appropriate term is Sumerian rather than Samaritan. There are still Samaritans around. Sumerians are a different group, but a long story. They show up in Tanakh already, so having been sort of transplanted into the land of Israel by the Babylonians. And then there's a rabbinic debate as to whether they convert properly. There's a story in Tanakh where they sort of convert, but it's because they're scared of lions. And they sort of figure that the reason why they're being terrorized by lions is because they're not worshiping the god of the land. So they convert to something like Jewish practice. And then the rabbis debate whether these are real Jews or not. So anyway, the Mishnah in Brachot says that you can make a zimun. The zimun is the practice of when dining with 3 people together. So they join together with intentionality to form a communal meal unit. And then when they recite the Birkat Hamazon, they recite the benching at the end of the meal, there's a special introductory prayer that they say together as a unit. And so this says that the Mishnah says that a kuti is somebody that you can make a zimun with. The Gemara asks, Amai, how can you say that you can make a zimun with a kuti? Lo yehei ela amaretz. At best, even if you think a kuti is a real Jew, there's still an amaretz. And we all know that you cannot make a zimun with an am haaretz. Simply off the table. Abaye Amar, Bekuti Chaver says, okay, so maybe it's a Kuti who's learned. Rava Amar, Afilu Tem Bekuti Amar. So it's still a Kuti Amar. So Hachab Amar, it's Rabbanan to Pligila Dere Meraskina. But there are different kinds of Amarets, and there are rabbinic debates as to what constitutes an Amarets. So Ezo Amar, it's Kol Sheinu Ochel Chula V'Tara. We get a much more expansive definition and a much more rigorous definition of what counts as an Amarets here. So the first proposal is what qualifies? Well, it's somebody who doesn't eat their non-sacred food with ritual purity. This is a very high standard. Normally we require ritual purity to eat truma, the chai that goes to the Kohen, and certain forms of sacrifices. But eating non-sacred food, but having to purify yourself first is a very high standard. They say, the rabbis say, just look, anybody who doesn't take the tithes appropriately. And we know that the Sumerians, whatever else they do wrong, they're good with tithes. So we can say that if you can have a kuti who's a certain kind of amaretz because they are willing to eat their produce without ritual purity, but they're not the worst kind of amaretz because they do take tithes, and so maybe that's good enough. Then we get a really wild expansion. So maybe it's just somebody who doesn't say Shema and daven twice a day. Rabbi Yishol Omer Kol she'einu maniach tefillin. He doesn't wear tefillin every day. Ben Azai Omer Kol she'ein lo tzitzis b'gdal. He doesn't wear tzitzis. Ben Azai Omer Kol she'ein mezuzah al pitlo. Don't have a mezuzah. All the basic trappings that we think of as defining the traditional Jewish home and way of being. If any of those things are missing, the person qualifies as an amaretz, who you cannot make a zimun with. Rabbi Nassan Bar Yosef Omer Kol sheyesh lo banim einu megadlem talmud Torah. If you have children and you don't give them a proper Torah education, you're out. Acherim Omer Afil Kar v'shanav lo shemish hamechamim harizeh amaretz. Says even somebody who learns and they review everything they learn, as they're an expert, the lo shemish talmid chachamim, but they don't proactively wait upon established rabbinic mentors, they still qualify as an Amar. It's an Amar of Huna Halakhic Acherim. He says the normative, the standard Halakhic practice follows this last view. It's not good enough to do all of the mitzvot, to daven twice a day, to have a mezuzah, to give your children a Torah education. It's not even good enough to be a Talmid Chacham, to be a rabbinic expert. You need to be a rabbinic expert who has done proper training, apprenticeship with a member of the rabbinic group. And then we get this wild story. Rabbi Bar Chama lo azmin ale de Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa, the Tani Sifra V'Sifra Hilchatzah. Rabbi Bar Chama refused to make a zimun with Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa. Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa was somebody who knew everything. He was a master of the Sifra, the Sifri, the Hilchata, the various rabbinic literatures. And Rami Bar Chama says, I can't make a zimun with this person. And he seems to be following the view we just saw, which is that yes, Rav Menashe is an expert, he's very learned, but he did not do a proper apprenticeship with a rabbinic master, and so he's not a member of the club. Ki noach nafshe Rami Bar Chama, when Rami Bar Chama dies, or Amar Rava, a fellow sage, says, Lo noach nafshe Rami Bar Chama, ela de lo azmin Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa. He says, the only reason Rami Bar Chama died, apparently he died young. Why did he die? It's because he refused to make a zimun, to dine together communally with Rav Menashe. And so again, a really powerful moment of, again, the rabbis articulating an extremely strong standard about who's in and who's out. And then there's a moment of tragedy and this just exposure of humanity and human frailty. And the response to that is that maybe there was a failure here in human connection and compassion. And maybe, once again, we need to be a little bit more relaxed, offer a little more love and charity and generosity in navigating these differences. We're not saying we need to, and here the Talmud doesn't quite reject the definition, but it says maybe be a little more charitable in how you apply it. Maybe you thought Rav Menashe hadn't done a proper apprenticeship, but really he had, and you hadn't given him the benefit of the doubt. But the message of the Talmud clearly, against the background of tragedy, is if you're going to have standards like these, you need to be very, very careful with them and apply them in a spirit of generosity and care. Okay. Then, in the Middle Ages, things get wild. And the Talmud is very clear. You may not make a zimun with an Amma Aretz. There's some ambiguity about what qualifies an Amma Aretz, what you need to do or not do to be in that group. But everyone agrees you cannot make a zimun with an Amma Aretz. The Rashba, the medieval commentary, he quotes a much earlier source. He quotes Rav Hai Gaon. This is like 9th century. Because of Hagon Rav Hai Zal, he says, V'hashta Rabbanan lo zahiriba b'hamilsa. He says, the formulation is important. He says, nowadays, in the 9th century, maybe it's the 10th century, I mean, I'm not a historian. Lo zahiriba b'hamilsa b'kamakiliba. He says, nowadays, the rabbis are not careful about this, and they're lenient about it, meaning they know it's on the books that you can't make a zimun with an Amma Aretz, but he says everybody does it, even the rabbinic elite. And I see Lindsay had a question here. Is an Amma Aretz someone who is willfully ignorant or rebellious, or is he someone who might not have the ability to learn and be a member of the rabbinic elite? Great questions. The rabbis clearly are thinking about this as somebody who's willfully ignorant or rebellious, because otherwise the punitive aspect of this doesn't really make sense. And they are thinking about it. It's something you could fix in theory. But obviously that's going to be a very tricky line to toe, because there are going to be people who don't go through the process of learning precisely because they don't have the relevant aptitudes, and it wouldn't seem fair to punish them for not having relevant aptitudes. And somebody asked anonymously who would be considered Amma Aretz in modern terms today. So we'll get to that a little bit. And part of what we're going to be negotiating here is, we're going to see there's going to be at this first medieval stage, after the goings on in the classical rabbinic stage, and in the medieval period, there's this initial move to say, actually, we can dine with the Amma Aretz, or it's just fine. It's just what we do. Then we're going to see in a second, in like the late Middle Ages, there's a move to say, well, maybe there is still a group that should qualify as an Amma Aretz by any definition. We should still be careful about. And then we're going to pull that back a little bit too. So we'll try to conclude with thinking about who may or may not qualify in contemporary terms. Okay, so that's in the Rashba's version, quoting from Rav Hai. We're just not careful about this. Because everyone around us, our friends, our neighbors, they're Amei Aretz by any definition. And it's just crazy. It's not feasible humanly or Jewishly for us to say we're not going to dine with them. And so we do dine with them. And you certainly can't be sitting at a table and say, I'm not making a zimun with you because you aren't sufficiently learned. You can't do that. Tosfot says, 12th, 13th century France, Germany. He says, again, the same language. Today, we're not careful about this. Our practice is to do this. And they make reference to a Talmudic passage in Masechet Chagiga, which we're not going to look at inside in the interest of time. But there, what it says is, Kiman mekabla ina sahaduta. We're just going to look at the quote here in the Tosfot. It's printed on the side of the page of the Talmud. Whose opinion, on whose authority do we nowadays? This is already in the time of the Talmud. Do we nowadays accept testimony from an Amma Aretz? This is the view of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says that we accept the testimony of an Amma Aretz. Kadei shelo yehi kol echad hoech lebona b'malat. And this is important. What it means literally is that what we don't want is for every individual person to go off and build their own altar. So this is the first time we're seeing an explicitly what I'm going to call political calculation introduced into the discussion, or a kind of social engineering calculation consideration. And the rabbi is saying, look, if we adopt a policy that we will not include the Amei Haaretz, what's going to happen? The Amei Haaretz are going to go off on their own and start a new religion. They're going to start their own subgroups, and they're going to compete with us, which means that they're going to compete with us, and that's bad. And we're going to lose them, and we don't want to lose them. It's one thing to bully them a little bit and to say, in fact, you can set up forms of elitism and societies where everybody wants to be a part of the elite, and their entire aspiration is to get there. But that can backfire. If you're too elite, you're too snobby, then nobody wants to be a part of the club anymore, and they just go off and start their own club. And so at some point, the rabbis realized we can't be too mean to them, we can't be too exclusive, because we want them to want to be a part of our group, and we have to show them some measure of love and affection. And so the Baalei Tosfos would say, we need to allow the Amei to participate in our zimun, because otherwise they'll be driven away, and we don't want them driven away. The last formulation I'm going to quote is from another Tosafot. This is verse number 8. And this formulation is more procedural and really, really wonderful. This is Hari. This is familiar with Rashi, the greatest really medieval commentary, depending on your disposition. But he writes the classical interpolated line by line commentary on the Talmud that's printed on the side. So his grandson, Rabbi Yitzchak, he says, he doesn't just say, look, nowadays we're not careful about this. This is a much more interesting formulation. This is Delo kol harotza litol etz Hashem, a reference to another Talmudic passage in a different context. But he says, not everybody who wants to take the name, lahachzik la'atzmo ketalmid chacham, to make themselves out to be a member of the rabbinic elite, via Talmud Chacham, shelo lezamen al haaretz, such that they would not make a zimun with an ignoramus, biyado litol. It's not everybody has the license or standing to make this claim about themselves. So he's addressing himself to, there's that one guy in the back of Shir, he's in the class, and he says, but Rebbe, I read it, it says in the Talmud, it says right in the Gemara that we're not supposed to make a zimun with an Amei. How can we do it? Isn't that the halacha? Isn't that the law? And the Rish says, you think you're such a Talmud Chacham, you think you're such a big shot, you can't make a zimun with your neighbor? Just give me a break. You're just as ignorant as they are. Or at the very least, you're not categorically better than they are. Trust me. He says this is universal. We do not presume ourselves to be scholars for this purpose. Meaning, we might be Talmidei Chachamim for other purposes. We might know that we're great scholars, but for this, when it comes to this question of relating to people who may or may not be a part of our group, when it comes to that, we absolutely cannot make ourselves out to be as a part of a separate elite class, because it's wrong and it's mean and it's cruel. And we should be exhibiting charity, generosity, and love, because we should be embracing community across difference. I find this incredibly powerful, and just whereas the other sources were just saying. And I also very powerfully giving expression to the basic conviction that it was never going to work to exclude these people. They're our neighbors and friends and family. The Re is giving a powerful form of moral reasoning, saying that a kind of musar, of a form of formation in piety. Is to say that the idea that you would exclude somebody is predicated on the idea that you are a member of the elite, and you should never be so arrogant to think that you're so elite and wonderful if it's going to issue in you excluding somebody else. Okay, so that's the early Middle Ages. In the 16th century, in the Shulchan Aruch and the Classic Code, He just says, Am haaretz gamur mizamnin alav bizman. He says, nowadays, that I know what the Talmud says, doesn't matter. Nowadays, a complete am haaretz, by any definition, no matter how subtle or great or wild the problematic their behavior is, we make a zimun with them. We simply do not draw these lines. We don't observe these boundaries. Eat with, dine with your neighbors and friends and family, and carry on good relationships and make a zimun with them. Maybe even go out of your way to dine with them, because rather than pushing them away such that they go off and make altars unto their own for themselves, we want them. We need them to be a part of our community. And we need them emotionally, spiritually, and we need them pragmatically. We need more people, and we can't afford to lose anymore. But then, I'm doing the ping-ponging back and forth on purpose. Then you get in the commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch a bit of pushback. The Shulchan Aruch and the early medieval tradition is very clear. We do not observe these strictures at all. There's no such thing as an am haaretz for this person. There's no such thing as a Talmud Chacham for this person. There are no boundaries. There are no categories here. But all of a sudden, this is, I think, 17th century Poland, around there somewhere. He says, no. He says, and I just in the bold part here in source number 10, Shim hayu portion mehen. He said, I'm sorry. V'im eno kore kriyas shema. Says, look, it's one thing. All right, so they're not like total scholars, but if they don't say Shema every day, ein mizamin, then you can't do a zimun. L'fitam ri mizamin kol am haaretz. Now he says maybe the Ri would disagree with this, as we saw, because nobody should think they're so special. But he says, I think if somebody doesn't say Shema every day, that's like he says, Magen Avraham looks around at the Jews of his time, the people he could potentially be at a communal meal with, any friend or neighbor or family member. And he says, all of them, every single one, they're not all scholars. They're not all perfect about kashrus. They're not all perfect about this or that, but they all say Shema every day. And if you're not saying Shema every day, then you are and if people know you don't say Shema every day, then you are very actively rebelling, breaking away from the community, and attempting a kind of positive subversion of communal standards. And that kind of person, we don't want to dine with, because that person we need to push away. They're dangerous. And he says, and he says, we don't need to worry that they'll go off and build an altar unto themselves, or for themselves. Let them go start their own new religion. It's fine. Came into Rov Amar's current Krishma, because the vast majority of people do say Shema. And so we're just losing a couple people. It's not such a big deal, the Magen Avraham says. A few deviants we can lose. The Aruch HaShulchan is in the 20th century already. And so he's already very familiar with the Reform movement, and he's in Eastern Europe. It's spread there, late 19th, early 20th century. And he knows that there have been massive efforts not people just de facto not observing the law like in the Middle Ages, but people programmatically not observing the law and shading, saying, no, Judaism stands for something different than what he thinks it stands for. And says, so he embraces the Shulchan Aruch's formulation, but he says, the same thing that the Rabbi said. He says, somebody who doesn't say Shema, or they don't wear tefillin, ein mizamin alav, you can't make a zimun with them. Duzehu Rasha, he says, those people we need to push out. The kol shekain demin va'apikoros, and all the more so if you have somebody who's a heretic and they deny basic tenets of Jewish religious thought, or the apikoros, something like that also. De'ein mizamin alayim, people who they actively avow heretical views and views that would undermine traditional Jewish thought and practice. So there we absolutely cannot do a zimun with them. And so, so as we saw, again, is initially in the classical period, there's this attempt to draw a very sharp line, the rabbinic elite and the am haaretz, Talmud Chacham and am haaretz. Already in the classical period, you start seeing some anxiety about this. Is this really workable? Can we really say that somebody who occasionally dines the am haaretz isn't a part of the club? But it's on the books. You can't make a zimun with them. In the early Middle Ages, they start saying, look, nobody observes this anymore. Then you get, and you shouldn't observe this anymore. The Shulchan Aruch says, absolutely not. We never make these calculations. You can, he says, an am haaretz gamur, complete categorical am haaretz. You can dine with them. You should dine with them. And then in the early modern period, and then up through modernity, we start pushing this. It starts going the other direction. They're saying, but wait, there are people who we should not be dining with because they are dangerous to our community. And if we give them the legitimacy of allowing them to participate in the Zimun, they will undermine our standards. And you see directly the level of the oscillating level of self-confidence that the community has with respect to a given group and given threat of subversion. Where the community feels totally confident, they're willing to allow these people in. When they start feeling threatened, there are other movements, there are other possible ways of doing Judaism, they start to pull back. So there's a difference between an apikoros and amaretz who might not be learned, but chooses to remain in from community. What does this say about challenging social norms but wanting to stay in the club? So excellent question. So I don't think we're going to cover that tonight. But I promise you we will get there. I mean, part of what I'm pointing towards is that there's these are formal technical legal categories with formal technical definitions. And you saw there are like 12 different opinions in Chazal about what qualifies as an am haaretz, what you have to do, what the parameters are. And so it seems like an impersonally or an objectively determinable category. You could just feed it into an algorithm. The algorithm would tell you this person is an am haaretz or not. But what we're starting to see from when we see the political considerations introduced, where we're trying to do these calculations of, will we cause these people to leave? Do we want them to stay? What are the implications for our community if they do stay or if they leave? We start to see that at the end of the day, what really counts is, are these people trying to undermine, subvert our communal togetherness and standing such that having them around will be detrimental to what we're trying to do or not? And that will have as much to do with their subjective personal relation to the law as objectively what they're doing. So you can have the same person, two people who don't observe Shabbos, but one person who's still, because of within their communal framework, not observing Shabbos isn't a matter of rebellion. They're not trying to stick it to the rabbis. They don't observe Shabbos because nobody they know observes Shabbos. Their parents didn't observe Shabbos. Nobody in their community observes Shabbos. So them breaking Shabbos doesn't have the same meaning of rebellion and attempted subversion as somebody where if 99, as we saw in the Magen Avraham, if 99% of people say Shema every day, then somebody not saying Shema is a powerful act of subversion. And so we're going to need to engage the subjective, the objective frame, just what's going on in that particular society at that time. But then also, what is this person trying to do, and what does it mean for them? What are they giving expression to when they engage in these behaviors, and what will everyone else be hearing? Just the last piece. This will set up some of the material for later. The Biur Halacha is around the same time as the Aruch HaShulchan, is written by the person most known by his book, the Chavetz Chaim, or the Mishnah Berurah. This is a major figure in rabbinic law in the early 20th century. So he points out, this is, we do not find, it's not totally true, but broadly speaking, we do not find this kind of concern on the books when it comes to davening in shul. When it comes to davening in shul, we do not have this kind of question about, can we have an am haaretz daven here? There may be certain extremes where people can be excommunicated and will be excommunicated for various purposes. And very famously on Yom Kippur, at the very least, we make a big declaration that al dat hamakom, al dat hakahal, that everyone is invited back in, no matter what they've done and no matter whether they've been excommunicated or not. But in general, in a regular minyan, we don't make a big deal. We don't test everyone to make sure that they're Talmidei Chachamim. And over here in the bolds, so the Biur is trying to figure out why this is a concern with regard to making a zimun, but not a concern with regard to making a minyan, a prayer quorum. So he says, "V'hachalinian zimun mistabra shefilu avar avera he says, first of all, this I hadn't meant to read this, but somebody who is, I think that even somebody who violates even one sin, but they do it publicly and they do it flagrantly. So this isn't somebody who just sins, but they go to shul and in an Orthodox shul, and they purposely, drive their car right up to the front, and they come in and turn the lights off and on, and they're very flagrantly violating Shabbos and clearly doing it so that everybody will see. So it says if you have somebody like that, even just one sin is enough to say that we're not going to make a zeman with them. Whereas it might not be enough to say we're not going to make a minyan with them. And he says, what's the difference? What did I do? The tam de inyan zimun hu shechiyuvo ba al yidei shemitchila hitchabru yachad la'achila. He says because the meaning of zimun, the obligation, flows from the fact of our joining together initially with intentionality to eat. And because of that, and it's because we join together to eat with intentionality that we then need to bench together. Whereas the davening with the minyan doesn't reflect any prior community. It's not like we were all doing something together and joining together and creating bonds of mutual affection. And then out of those bonds, we then turns toward prayer. We join together for prayer. So there our standards are much lower. When it comes to the zimun, it is a function of our dining together and our joining together over our breaking bread together. And I brought this here at the end just to show it's because that zimun is founded on breaking bread together, and because that is such a powerful site of human relationship and community, such a powerful engine of human relationship and community. The stakes are so much higher. So what the rabbis are understanding, and just of the many things I wanted to bring out, is isolating the dining room table and breaking bread as a site of particularly high stakes for community. It's both a place where we can build lasting friendships, but precisely because of that is a place where we also need to be on our guard. And the stakes are that much higher. And so the effort, the thought and intentionality that will go into navigating these challenges will be all the more intense in this setting. That's my spiel for tonight. I'm happy to hear any questions or thoughts, and then we'll disband for this evening.
Any last questions? I don't think there are any on Facebook. No, there are not.
Okay, great.
Anyone here on Zoom? I'm gonna remove the spotlight on Rabbi Ozar so we can see each other again. And yeah, any last thoughts? If not, Rabbi Ozar, you're still sharing your screen.
Sure. Okay.
Bye.
Well,
Bye.
thank you so much,
Okay.
everybody. And again, everyone's feel more than welcome to write. Just alexozar@gmail.com.
Thank you so
more
much.
than happy to be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabbi Ozar, and thank you to everyone who joined us. And our Spring Zman classes are open now. For example, tomorrow we have Halacha for the Ages, reading responsa from a bygone era with Dr. Rachel First, Torah and Technology, Ancient Wisdom for a Digital Age with Rabbi Daniel Nevins, and Mishnah in Depth with Rabbi Leah Sarna, among many other very exciting classes, which I'm sure you'll greatly enjoy and benefit from. So please check those out at what is the website? 5784.drisha.org/spring. We'd love to see you again soon. I'm actually going to be away next week, but looking forward to seeing you all